Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome, guys. Man, so some of you guys how many were here last time we did this? 4, 5. Yep. Okay. Cool. Man. So like more than half the room is actually new, and so Ames, Corey, you still Stonebridge? Are you? And what do you consider yourself right now? Ames. You're the symbiotic relationship between the two. Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. So Ames, Pseudo Boone. We got Candeo in the room. I see. That's awesome. Cedar Falls. Welcome, guys. Micah was here. Hey, there he is. I wasn't sure if you went to graphics or if you were in here. So, Cottage Grove got Des Moines represented. So what is that? 3? We'll call it 3.5 sites. Corey, you get a half site today. Call it 3.5. That's great, guys. Right, call 4. Just drive it home. Round up. Right, Mark Aaron Math. We got 7. So, man, for those of you guys who are new to these sessions, so this is the second of what we hope to be 4 sessions we're going to do over kind of the 9-month school year. So we did one in September, I think. Was it September 30th, I think was the last time we did it. That was kind of the first one. And then we'll do this one, obviously, today. And then we're going to do 2 more sometime in the spring semester. We don't know yet. So those dates, we knew going into the last one when this one would be. We don't know when the dates of the fall or the spring ones will be yet. So we'll get those out. So watch your emails for those. But yeah, the goal of these is really to, we kind of said, hey, we have a ton of new operators and volunteers in the Ames world that we're trying to onboard, and even just trying to reteach fundamentals and things like that. So as we look at that, what if we just started doing some concepts like this? And we've talked about doing this for about 3 or 4 years, finally got the catalyst and momentum to do it, and then said, hey, what if we just invited everybody in the network, not because we think we have something really great, but just because anybody can always use a refresher and training, things like that. And if you're an hour and a half out, or if you're 3 hours, I mean, Iowa City was here last time, which is cool. So I think it's a great way to even network across the network too. Yeah, so tell your friends once we find out the next ones. And if there's people that want to come, man, bring them along. So yeah, so this is the audio session. So if you're looking for graphics, that's around the corner actually right now. It's like when you get on a flight and like they're always like, this flight's going to Des Moines. It's like, how did you get on the flight if you're not going? I don't know how, but like, I guess you could have walked in the wrong door here. We didn't ticket you at the door. So you chose wisely. No, I'm just kidding. No. Yeah. So we even, last time we taught them twice during the day, and then kind of gave people to flex in and out. Just feedback from the last one, we said, I think we can nail it all out in one morning and preserve more people's time and things like that. So, yeah, we welcome your feedback too on whether the content was helpful or terrible, whether what Casey wants to walk into the frame or not. That's also helpful. Yeah, so we'll do today primarily in the audio discipline. We're going to work on looking at EQ and dynamics. And when I say dynamics, I'm going to unjustly steer that towards compression. So there's a lot of dynamics, de-essing, companding, compression, expanding. I'm sure I'm for limiting, leveling, ducking. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff in the world of dynamics. We're probably going to spend most of our time in the dynamics section looking at compression because it's probably the tool that we use more than anything. There are times when it becomes appropriate to use the other tools, and we'll touch on a couple of those. But man, there's so much great resources online too that you can just kind of peer into those. If you're like, hey, when should I use fill in the blank? There's some really great resources out there. Again, I'll kind of highlight a couple of those that would be good areas that just kind of reference for what I would say credible information. There's a lot of really bad resources out there too. I won't address those, but yeah, because there's probably too many of those to address, unfortunately. Last time we talked a lot about, in our Audio 101 session, so this will be 102, Audio 101, we talked a lot about, it was kind of an overview. So talking about the first things you do when you step up to a mixer, the first things you do is step up to a mic, to an instrument, and that will influence what we do again today. And then that was just kind of a quick rundown. So we even kind of shotgun through EQ and dynamics, and then we got into a little bit of bussing very smallly, and then listened to some audio samples and things. So even as we look at EQ and dynamics, we're going to come back to the fundamental things is what we're doing as audio engineers is just amplifying source, right? So we want to get the best source possible. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean go out and buy the most expensive guitar or pay for the studio musician to come and play on your stuff. Those are helpful sometimes. But even with the most expensive tool in your hand, you got to have the chops to know how to get it somewhere. So we're going to look at a lot of like source and mic position first. So even as we get into the EQ side of things, before I grab a knob on my mixer and start jacking around with the EQ, I'm actually going to walk up to my instrument, whether it be a drum or maybe have a conversation with my vocalist in terms of mic position, listen to the guitar amp. I might go back and actually move the mic on the guitar amp before I actually grab an EQ knob. Because once you start grabbing an EQ knob, you start to introduce phase into the conversation. When you start amplifying certain signals or even cutting certain things, you start playing with the phase relationship of that signal coming out. So we want to get it as close to natural as possible. So in the musician's in-ears or wedges, it sounds as close to possible. So if you're an electric guitarist and you have a poor representation of your tone, man, it sounded great back at the amp, but here it just sounds terrible. Well, that's not helpful. So we want to try to fix that so it's good for you and also good for us as the front of house engineer. So we're going to look a lot at source and trying to fix the source, even the snare drum. Man, it doesn't sound right. So we talked last time, even like snare drum, imagine this is the top surface snare drum. This will do something different than the mic at this angle, than the mic at this angle, the mic back here. Just getting the mic in the right position is always going to help you with trying to maximize what kind of information you're taking in from the instrument. And because we're just replicating what the source is, we want to spend time actually listening to the instrument, going up, listening to the actual snare drum. What does that actually sound like? Or listening to the vocalist. Maybe it's your teaching pastor, having a conversation with them for a minute, just small talk, before you actually get into trying to do their mic check. So you actually hear, what does the voice sound like? What is the nuance? Are they very sibilant? So they have a lot of S's, those kind of things in their voice? Or is it a very dark tone? Do they not have a lot of presence in their voice? Because then when they get up on the stage, start mic checking, if they don't have a lot of presence and you're trying to get presence, you're thinking your mic position is not, well, they actually just don't have it. So how do you introduce that? How do you try to get the clarity out of that? So again, even as we talk about EQ and dynamics, going back to the same things we talked about before, fundamentally, source and mic position, gain structure, making sure you have a good input signal so you're not dealing with just a little bit of input signal on the bottom or too much where you're clipping the channel. You want to make sure you have a healthy amount of input signal into there. So it's that source, mic position, gain structure, and then a lot of cases just a filter is a good place to start for EQ. So a high-pass filter would be the first one where it's sucking out some of the lows, and your low-pass filter where it's sucking out the highs and kind of shaping that in. You should be able to get pretty close to what you want to hear with just that simple set of tools if you've got your mic in the right spot, you've got a good source and all that stuff. So that is a recap from last time, but definitely influences. We're always going to come back to that because we come back to that baseline fundamental every single time as we look at audio. Because that will, if you get that right on the front end, you're going to save yourself an immense amount of work later in terms of not having to chase things or chase EQs all day or even compression. Maybe the signal's just over compressed. Loosen up your compression. Well, maybe the mic was too close to the signal, or maybe they're not in good mic position, so you don't have it. You can't even get your compressor to engage. Those types of things. Everybody makes sense when I talk about like gain structure, high pass filter, low pass filter. That all makes sense. You know what those are. So low pass filter I think is actually an interesting one because that's something that people don't use a whole lot. High pass filter is pretty widely used, but a low pass filter where you're letting the lows pass and you're kind of sucking out the highs. That's probably the most, that's going to be a generalization statement, the most underutilized tool. It's not the most, but it's probably a widely underutilized tool. The same way we utilize a high-pass filter to clean up some of the low-end information and get just mud out of the bottom of our mix and do that quickly and effectively. The same thing with the high information. So as you get louder, more high-end information is that's where a lot of volume complaints come from, is when things are not only out of a frequency relationship with one another, but just high and harsh and brittle, a lot of high frequency information. That's what hurts. That's what comes at you, and that's what starts hurting. Once you've been mixing audio for a long time, you may not hear anything over 12 or 14K. So you could have that problem. So you might say, I just got a natural low-pass filter. But you also got to be cognizant of that. I think that was something for me in the last couple of years. A lot of our SALT engineers can hear things a lot more than I can hear. So that's something where they can hear additional probably 2 or 3K that I can't hear. And it's just kind of funny as I'm like, I don't hear that. Like, you don't hear that? I'm like, no, I don't hear that, man. So it's just, yeah. So, but sucking that out, all that extra information on the top end isn't necessarily helpful. I'll use a term to refer to that as air. So like when you hear like a vocal and kind of that, it's real airy, kind of not like reverb, but just like breathy, airy, real high-end stuff. We're going to refer to that as air in our context. So it's going to suck out that air from that. So even like on a floor tom, you might not need all that high-frequency information. On a snare drum, you might not need everything over, I don't know, AK. Even our pastor mic EQ, we basically put a low-pass filter in down at about 8.5K, and we're bringing the high-pass in to about, I think 179. So it's actually, we're killing a ton of information. And it doesn't sound that bad in there. It just actually sounds pretty natural because you and I don't have a lot of, I mean, we have air in our voice, but I don't need to listen to it for 35 minutes. So those are just helpful things that, again, kind of clean up that spectrum that allow you to even kind of create a warmer tone that's actually just more comfortable and engaging to listen to. So that makes sense? Any questions with that stuff, guys? So when we talk about EQ, so transition over to EQ. So EQ or equalization. So there are many different things. When we talk about EQ, we will talk subtractive first. So, and I talked about that last time, how that was even just a new kind of vernacular in our context, a new verbiage, because we used to always say subtractive EQ. There is a time to do additive EQ, and when I'm talking about those things, here's just a standard parametric EQ. This is in Logic. So again, looking at your neutral line, that's the line across the screen, 0, and then frequencies across the bottom. So subtractive would be pulling things out. So we would say subtractive EQ would be kind of coming in here and doing things like this. So you're subtracting information from the signal. And typically what you're doing with that is you're subtracting things from the nuance of the room, nuance of the vocal. Maybe it's a little muddy. You're trying to clean it up a little bit. Again, when we look at a frequency spectrum, oh man, I should get a picture of that next time. This would be helpful. So when we have our, how many of you guys are French or familiar with like a sound pressure curve or something like that, the equal loudness curve? So there's an equal loudness curve. Google, where are you? Equal loudness curve. I got a nice Q in the front of that. This is actually an interesting little tangent, but equal loudness curve just kind of looks at the balance of frequencies across every spectrum of the balance the relationship of frequency volume across every frequency in the spectrum. So sometimes you'll see like at front of house, we've got like a little smart window or something like that where it's actually looking at it, it's analyzing the frequencies in the rooms. It's comparing it against what the desk is actually sending out and what it's getting in. And we want to look at usually the relationship is more in the low end. It's a longer waveform than what's in the high end, so it is going to look a little more like this. It's going to give you a little warmer character. But we're looking at the relationship. We have a finite spectrum of frequency that we can actually hear. So again, some of us have more frequency than we can hear than others. But nonetheless, we're competing for that same information. Much like a freeway, you have a finite amount of lanes on the freeway. You can only put so many cars on the freeway. So as we look at that, we have a finite amount of frequency that we can actually work with. And we're going to carve things out within our spectrum to create more space for other things to come in. So I might be saying, man, my bass guitar I'm going to get a lot of point and tone right around 1K. So I'm going to carve things out. Maybe I'm going to carve the acoustic guitar around 1K. Maybe I suck a little bit of vocal around 1K. I know my vocals sit in that, I call it 2 kilohertz to 5 kilohertz region, that 2K to 5K. In that area is a lot of the clarity of the vocals. So if I have a lot of electric guitar in there or piano, that's all going to be competing. And it might not just be just a fader of like, oh, push this up, pull this down. It might be that we're going to use a little bit of EQ to kind of suck out some of that frequency to create a pocket for that other frequency to live in. That makes sense? So I might actually create, let's say this is a piano. I don't want to pull a ton of stuff out, but I'm going to shade it down just a little bit to basically give my give myself some place to put some vocals in there and just kind of get them in there so they sit out more clearly. That way I don't have to push the vocal louder. I don't have to spike the top end on the vocal. And by doing subtractive EQ on multiple sources, we can start to place things into the mix where we want them and kind of manipulate the frequency spectrum to get things where they are. That also might, obviously you want, as we talked earlier, we want to have a great representation of the source coming through the PA or into your ears, whatever the listening tool is, whether it be the main speaker cluster or the in-ears. But we might on our own say, like our acoustic guitar doesn't always sound great on its own. And that's because we take some frequencies out because they compete with our vocals. So now if I have a set where it's just literally like a piano and acoustic guitar, I'm going to treat that differently because I don't have two electric guitars and a whole drum set trying to compete for that same spectrum. So I can put things back in and maybe only have 2 vocals instead of 5 or something like that. So it's just managing the balance and the relationship between all those, and that's where you start to get that thicker sound, and you start to manage the information coming towards you. So we'll talk about subtractive EQ. So when we talk about EQ, we talk about subtractive first, because there are times where we might spike the top end. Maybe on the snare drum, you want to get a little more crack out of there, a little more attack. So you might bring up that top end around 5K. But there's enough warmth in that snare drum down in the lower region that's going to balance out that crack that maybe it's not going to compete with that 5K in the vocals. So it's not just a 1-for-1 all the time. It's what do you hear using your ears. Sometimes EQs can look pretty funky. That can be a signal that's the mic position's wrong. That can also be just the aspect of like, man, I'm using my ears and what I hear is okay, but this looks super gnarly. A good gut check is like, okay, listen to source alone. Okay, I just totally neutered the thing. Then it probably isn't right. Or, no, okay, but it works well with the other sources. So even as I mix things, if I'm mixing the full band, I usually start with the band first, turn up my vocals. I'll bring kind of the drums, or maybe I kill the drums, and I start listening to electric guitar 1, start listening to electric guitar 2, hear how those are really, okay, kind of balance those two out in terms of the volume. Now bring the acoustic into it. Okay, suck that down a little bit. Okay, now bring the bass. Kind of bringing out all those that are vying for that same spectrum in that same area. Kind of listen to the relationship of those and then bring them all back into the mix and go, okay, that works. And on their own, maybe they sound good, maybe they don't. We want them to sound as good as they can. But using subtractive EQ kind of gets them into a place where we can manage multiple or even more information in good places. So questions with that in terms of subtractive EQ? That makes sense when we talk about subtractive. And we'll do some audio samples here in just a few minutes. Yeah. EQ? Equalization. Yeah, it's a truncated, that's what I was like, EQ is equal. I guess it's just equalization. So, yeah, great question. So, we're just looking at that spectrum and do what we can with that. So there's going to be times where, again, we might spike up the top end. That's probably a little wide, but we might spike that up. In most of the things you'll see nowadays, how many of you guys have digital audio consoles? Pretty much everybody. Is anybody still using analog audio consoles? Or doesn't have? Okay, that's great. So, man, we were built on analog. So that's the thing. And actually, you're going to see in some of our audio examples, I'm actually using a lot of analog plugins to emulate that analog sound just because there's a character that I think we've gotten away from in digital. And there's a lot of guys that prefer kind of that character of the old analog sound. But this is what you'd see on a digital desk or in a DAW, digital audio workstation. You'll see things, this parametric EQ, this is pretty much what you walk up to nowadays. So you've got your filter in there. Here's your high pass filter. Here's a shelf. This has got 4 parametric bands, an upper shelf, and then a low pass filter. So all those kind of things in there. You can, in this you can turn them on or turn them off. You also have a few controls in there. So you've got your frequency, obviously. That's where you are in the spectrum from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz probably. You've got the amount of EQ in there, whether it's additive or subtractive in decibels. And then this bottom number is a Q, and Q is just a physics term. It's the width of the signal. So a Q of 1.4 would be 1 octave. And in the last session we talked about how I don't play piano, but guys that do understand one octave really well, it's that like C to C kind of deal like that. So that's going to make a lot more sense to some people than it will to myself. But the lower the Q, you see that going down, the wider the signal, the tighter the Q, the narrower the signal. And this is where the conversation about analog influence in the digital world. With digital tools, man, you can get surgical with that thing. You can get super narrow. Even I think on a Digico desk, we can go up to like 20 or something like that on a Q. But it's super, super narrow. And you can go super, super wide. Back in the analog days, you didn't have that privilege. You pretty much had, because of the components used within the capacitors, the voltage regulators, all those different analog components, they had a finite span of where you could dial them in and out. And even I think, let's just look at, here's one right here. So this is an emulation of an old SSL E-series desk. And you can see here again, you've got you get your filters, your high pass and your low pass filter. So here on a vocal, we're not actually using a high pass filter. Or sorry, we're not using the low pass filter, we're using the high pass filter. But then you get your 4 zones, and you might say you can either bell these. So in the case where we've got the option for 4 parametric bands here that are kind of bells, and this would be, looks like a bell, versus a shelf. This is the bell shelf switch on this old analog desk. And you've got kind of your lower stuff. So here you have a Q, which has just kind of the narrow to the wide. This is your Q knob, only on these 2 middle bands. And here you just kind of have a little shelf. And I think, yeah, so bell, it's probably a fixed Q on this one. Yeah, so the bell is just the width. So that is, so when you suck out a, when we're talking about subtractive EQ, you got your signal, and you're going to basically pull out within the pitch range. You're not actually stepping out. You're not just sucking it down. There is a relationship across that spectrum. So let's say this is 250 hertz. Maybe this is across 1 octave. Maybe it's, I don't know, 110 to 360 or something like that, roughly is kind of the range. So you're not actually sucking out all this information too. All this, it's more of a, what's the word, logarithmic relationship than it is an actual linear relationship.
So when you engage those middle things,
yeah.
it's just adding a frequency.
Well, you're fine. Yeah, great question,
Okay,
Deb.
I
Yeah.
thought it meant something different.
No. Yep. Yeah. So it's a bell curve. So even when you talk about like even statistics, you got your standard whatever distributions. It's that bell curve thing. So we talk about bells, and I think it's probably logarithmic is probably the right word I'm looking for right now. But it's that relationship. It's not you're not pulling out where even, I think this is a great example of, you can kind of see the width of that. It's not pulling out all that, so you're not actually just like muting the signal and pulling it all out. It's just a relationship. It's pulling out across that spectrum. The target, let's say you're really bright or you're really muddy at 250 hertz. So we're going to, or maybe 370 in this example. So I'm going to target around 370 because maybe my ear told me that, maybe my smart window, my audio window, monitoring window told me that. But I'm going to pull out some frequencies around that. By targeting there, I'm going to pull it down. Maybe 9's pretty heavy, but maybe it's 6 or 3 dB there. But across that width, I'm going to listen and use my ears to kind of gauge, well, how narrow do I want that? How wide do I want that, to kind of play with that relationship? Because you're talking about harmonics in there too. So most of your shading will be down low. If you start running out of parametric bands, this is what I used to do. I would start, man, okay, there's a ring up here, and as I'm ringing out the mic, it's ringing here and here and here and here. Those are all just harmonics of something else happening somewhere else in the spectrum. So if we start taking out down here and cutting in a wider band using the influence of these, they didn't get super narrow like these do. So you can even see this knob just goes from 0.5 to 3. So let's say we do a 1.4, pull it down here, pull it down here. We're going to impact all the harmonics that come out of that rich signal by doing that too. So we're actually pulling down harmonics that are up here by treating the signal down here. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm going to do more of my EQ down here than I probably will up here. If I have some left over, I'm going to do it up here. That's not a rule of thumb. That's what I find out more. I do more treatment down here than I do up here. And that's just to get rid of harmonics up here. I used to do a lot up here, and then I'm like, well, now I'm out. This is just the case of my naivety. The first plugin from the plugin company Waves, the first plugin I ever bought was Q10. And what it is, it's a 10-band parametric EQ. I thought, finally I can do my work. Now, I'm just an idiot. That's what it was. It was just a case of like, I just don't understand what I'm doing. So once I started understanding and listening to people who are a lot smarter than me, a lot better than me, as to like, oh, now, okay, let's go after some root signals down here. That's going to clean up everything up here. Coincidentally enough, I don't know the last time I used Q10. So that's just a case of growing in your discipline, I guess. Yeah. So we will use, in what we do, we use a lot of plugins here. We do use a lot of the EQ set from SSL. There's a character in this too that it's emulating. This is very clean. This is a very clean, true digital processing unit. This has some character to it that even just inserting it on the channel completely just neutral with everything at 0, not even doing any processing, it will just brighten up vocals. It'll round them out a little bit. It just kind of helps. It's a little bit more musical, and that's just, it's emulated in the circuits that were once on those desks. So yeah, so we use even in our digital world that we have some great digital tools, we still utilize a lot of analog EQs just to give kind of that character back that we once had.
What's that one called?
This is SSL. So it's the SSL 4000 pack, and this is the SSL E channel. There's also a G channel that is more of a gray. It's a G series desk. It's gray. Where's G channel? G channel is actually a little bit different. So you have this like divide by 3 thing here, or multiply by 3. And that's just taking, that's basically, again, it's some sort of voltage or step function inside that you're engaging that is literally just doing math inside and treating the bell accordingly. So it's just a different character. This is used a lot more in rock. The G channel desk was used a lot more in rock. We do pop rock, but E channel is a lot more probably pop and hip hop, and it's just rounder, a little clearer in the vocals. You'll hear it in a little bit here. We could ABM at some point. Waves did a great video. Tony Maserati, who's producer for like Beyonce, Alicia Keys, he does a thing. It's like 2-minute video on YouTube where he compares actually the two, and you're like, oh yeah, now I hear the signal very different. I mean, it's the same, basically trying to level them out, engage this when you start hearing the difference between the two. So in those, and you'll even see, we'll walk through in the compression things. These are just 5 different compressors, each an analog emulation of an old compressor, and you'll start to hear like, oh, how does each one have a different character? But I want to talk less about the tool, less about the character of the tool, and more about just using EQ. So subtractive first. There is a time to use additive EQ, and maybe that's to bring out again that crack in that snare drum, or maybe a little bit of brightness, maybe that air again, to use that vocal term. Maybe it's not the 16K air, but maybe it's air in the 5 to 10K region. Gives a little brilliance to the vocal. So let's just jump into something here and actually listen to some of this. Davis, we're going to use your vocal, man. Right? Okay, so this is a capture from Sunday back in November. I think it's a Sunday, maybe it's a Wednesday. Doesn't matter. But sometime back in November, September rather. We're in November right now. Back in September, yeah. So just multi-tracking this, we have a way to capture all the signals off the board in each channel, and then we can play back and kind of do tools, look at tools, and do sessions like this. So
set the captives free, for who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power.
So you're kind of hearing a little bit. So this is a play of Davis's vocal. Davis has got a great baritone vocal with it's probably a beta 58 capsule, so the beta's got a little more brilliance in it, but it's a pretty dynamic, traditional straight capsule. So that's what we're looking at here. We could start with going like, oh, maybe I put him on a Beta 87A or an 87C, some sort of other capsule. It's going to clean up some of the natural nuance there. It might suck out some of like the low mids that are a little bit muddy in there.
Every knee will bow before the lion and the lamb.
As a whole, that and the whole mix, like the only reason it doesn't sound as clean as it did is because you probably heard it first processed. But once I put in this thing and start cleaning it up,
every knee will bow before.
You start to get a little bit of that point of the tone back and things like that. So what we're doing there is, again, we're largely just kind of looking at, we have some EQ tools here. So we're looking at right around, what is this, 280? There's some character there in Dave's vocal. We'll just kind of go back. Let's do this here.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives
So that's that 280 right there. I'm just sweeping.
Who can stop the
I'm going to say something too. Boost to sweep, or boost to cut is a great, great adage that we'll kind of use too. So instead of bringing the whole vocal up, some guys have a tendency to mute everything else, and this is muted just for the aspect of this example. If I was in the room right now, what I'd probably be doing is either listening in some sort of near field or reference monitor, but I want to listen to that vocal still as it plays into the mix. Again, it's the whole frequency spectrum. I want to see how it relates to the whole mix. To get the finite cleanliness of it down, I'm going to solo it and listen to it. But I also want to quickly go back and listen to how it sounds in the mix and relates to everything else. So right now we're just soloing, we're listening to it. I'm not going to drive it way high and loud. Yes, question in the back?
I just say, can you do it on the, can you show on the parametric EQ
Yeah.
so we can see more visually?
Sure, because it's kind of small. That's a great idea, Tim.
You can't really, I mean, it's just a better visual
Yep.
representation of what you're doing.
Yep, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yep. So let's do it with this one. That's great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that feedback. That's really good. Yep.
My question was just kind of as it relates to that solo in place.
Yep. Yeah, we do that a lot. So solo in place is what it does. Is basically when you hit solo, you solo a channel, it mutes out everything else. And that's a great tool to have. Just don't ever leave it on during this actual event.
So that's something that's on the Digico desk.
That is a Digico function.
That does in the house. You're saying.
Yep. So basically, it makes your PA a giant set of near-field monitors. Yep. So it's a quick way to hear things very surgically, quickly, coming in and out of that instead of having to mute everything out, listen to solo, and come back to it. There's probably other manufacturers that have. Does Yamaha have solo in place?
Yeah.
You guys have a QL1.
32 and like the Q series stuff.
Yeah.
You have to kind of go in and find it and turn it
Sure.
on, but it's not as intuitive and accessible as
Yeah.
the Digico stuff.
Yeah, Digico's right up top.
It's there.
Yep.
And there's ways to work around it too if you want to use the function. I like that too.
That's great.
What did you mean by capsule earlier?
Like the microphone head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's great question, guys. Yeah, and this is, as I use terms that are unfamiliar, please ask, because guarantee somebody else has a question. So we have different capsules you can put on basically the microphone is two components. You have the capsule and the body, which is just the transmitter, essentially, to get it back to on a wireless mic, to get it back to the receiver. Even on a wired mic, you still have a capsule, and a lot of microphones either have a dedicated capsule. I guess usually wired mics are just, you buy the mic the way it is, and then it has the capsule. Wireless microphones you can interchange the capsule. So we have KSM9s, we have Beta 87Cs, we have Neumann KK105s, we have Beta 58s, we have, we used to have a KSM8. We have a number of different capsules that each have a different sonic quality and character, and you can look up, go to Google Shure 87A, and you can look up that microphone capsule. I'll actually show you. There's an EQ curve that each microphone capsule has by design. The guys at Shure in Chicago have gone in and designed the capsule to do a certain thing. So before even, again, when I'm trying to minimize the amount of EQ we're doing, we're actually going to grab the right tool for the job. It's like, man, I could grab a hammer and a rubber mallet are very similar, but they have two distinct differences. A Beta 87 and a Beta 58 are both microphone capsules, but they do different things. They clean up certain things on vocals. In the box, we use a lot of Beta 87s because that room has no treatment, though it's here now finally, so we're going to hang treatment. But we use the 87s to clean up a tremendous amount of low end just right at the source to give us that lift for the vocals in that room particularly. So in here where we're well treated, we can actually use a darker capsule to kind of tame our vocals a little more on the brightness of them. So Great question. Yeah, so let's walk through Davis's vocal again here, just kind of looking at how we're going to, again, starting with no filters engaged. So no parametric, parametric EQ, no filters engaged, no low pass, high pass, shelves, bells, anything like that.
God who comes to save is here to set
I'm going to start with a high pass filter here.
For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion,
Changing that
the
ratio.
Lion of Judah. He's roaring with.
And that alone, just that alone, sucked out a tremendous amount of the mud in the vocal. So that's why I'm saying earlier where we're saying, man, if you just have like the right gain, the right mic position, source is good, right gain structure, and a high pass filter, man, you can be really effective really fast. So let's turn that off. Just listen what that filter does, right? Just that low pass filter or a high pass filter.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who?
It even cleaned up some of the bleed in the mic there too. You could hear the bass guitar and the PA feeding back to the mic. It sucked that out of there too, so it even cleaned up some bleed, which is awesome.
God who comes
So I'm gonna keep
going. Is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power. God who comes to save is here to set the captives free.
So I've cleaned up a lot now. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of character, and that's what I'm used to that SSL kind of giving me some of that character back. But it's a lot cleaner on and off here.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah.
So as we listen to that on and off.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion.
So in there, it's actually sitting pretty nice and pretty. We just did some things down here, and I didn't go too wide because I don't want to suck it out because it did lose some character in there. Because again, it's a baritone vocal, so we have a lot of meat down the low mids. That's also really warm, and I didn't do any additive things there. I could probably take some additive things there, and let's do some additive EQ, and let's just bring some sparkle back into that voice. Maybe on that top end, just get it to kind of sit above the rest.
Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring.
And that might be close enough, and I can move on to the next thing for now. Now I can always come back and tailor that closer and things like that. Oh, I see how it is. Our neighbors to the west don't like us as well. Yeah, so that was just, again, quick 30 seconds in that. What I'm doing there with, like I said before, it's very similar. I don't know, let's see how far off I was. So this is Davis's vocal here that, this is all jacked up right now because I moved it earlier. There's like another 3 cuts. So I'm about 280. Where am I at over here? 255. Let's see. Here I'm at 800. Took out about a 660. So again, I spent a lot more time refining his vocal with this. So I got close here. And I didn't do a boost to cut here. I just kind of sucked it out. But I'm going to spike that. I can listen to it as a supercross, and it's going to like, woo, you're going to hear it like amplify in certain areas. Be like, okay, that's what I don't want right there. And pull that out. So again, I don't want to be too destructive with it. Pulling out 6 dB is a sizable amount. Yeah. There are other tools that are out there. I'll talk about this for a few minutes. This is good.
I was just gonna say, can you talk about like how it relates? Like if you're sitting close to like feedback, how EQ relates?
Yeah.
Because that's why I think subtraction
Totally.
is good first, but once you start doing additive, it starts to
That's great, Tim.
get into a possible feedback issue.
Yeah. So if you add EQ to something like that, you're going to contribute to the feedback most likely. Again, you're basically adding volume to the mic at that frequency. And by starting to add frequencies, maybe, I mean, we already have our gain pretty hot. We've got our mic pretty hot in the mix. So if you've got floor wedges or maybe your PA isn't in a good spot and your mic's out in front of the PA, you can definitely start to get into a position where as you start to sparkle a little bit of this up top here, you can start to introduce feedback into the PA, which is what you don't want. Obviously, you're trying to avoid that. So you do want to be careful with additive. Subtractive, you're taking stuff away, so you're reducing the amount of volume at those frequencies. So really, by definition, it's a lot harder to introduce feedback into that situation. That's great. I should have said that earlier because that's a great reason for why you also do subtractive is that reason there. So, which is why we say subtractive first. It wasn't until recently that I actually started doing a little bit of lift, and that's usually just kind of my cheat if I can't get other things figured out. I'll just give a lift over here. But if I'm going to spend more time, I'm going to try to avoid doing additive EQ on anything. I'm going to try to do more subtractive EQ on things and kind of let even just the natural character of this, let that be the lift in the vocal. So there's probably something going on here where it's spiking in the top end there. But, yeah.
Hear the difference between your EQ and
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, you guys are asking great questions. Yeah, Deb, let's do that. So this would be the one we just did.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free.
So let's go ahead and turn this one on.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free.
So there's actually a lot more warmth in that one and that one, right? There's still a lot of boxiness on the bottom. So that's going to get tailored out with, let me make sure I have that on right before I say that because I'm surprised by that a little bit. But, there it is. Thank you. There it is. I'm like, that doesn't sound right.
Is here to set the captives free. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah.
So I think there's a little more character in this one. I don't know what it is, but there's just more character about it. I think it's just it's a little rounder, a little warmer, and it's probably just that SSLE character.
is there a low pass on that one?
On this one? Yeah, about 70, 65. We can crank it up too just to hear what it does.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power. God who comes to save is here.
So they're close, but I mean, you can do different stuff, and neither one's probably wrong. Again, it's listen to it in the mix and using your ears in terms of, and it's all the tool you have available. You know, we don't always have this tool available. A lot of times this is the tool. And I even know like Chris Tomlin's guys primarily use, like on their Digico desk, they primarily use all Digico EQs. Sorry, TV. They primarily use all Digico EQs, and then they start using analog or waves, compressors, and things like that. But they would say like, oh man, the parametric EQ on a lot of our desks is really good. I just really like the character that this gives us in our gathering. So that's why I tend to lean more towards this direction. But it does, I think, the big takeaway, what I liked about the EQ is that, or with the analog stuff, is that it influences what we do here. This is a good reminder that, man, I shouldn't have 10 cuts. I shouldn't need a Q10 to be able to handle a vocal signal. If the dudes in the 70s who are making your Earth, Wind, and Fire, if they can get by with four zones of parametric or of EQ, I shouldn't need 7 or 8 of them, right? I'm probably taking too much out of the signal. Now, there are times that if you have a headset mic in front of a PA and the dude's actually looking back at the PA, you might have to do a lot of cuts up top there. And there might be times you're pulling a lot of things out there. Again, there's a reason we have tools, and there's a time for everything in the season. But musically, we're going to do most of our subtractive EQ down below. There is a tool that, this is going to spend a few minutes here. what we're doing here is we're actually full-time pulling out these spectrums. So all this signal comes in. It's looking at this EQ, this tool, this filter is looking at all the signal coming in. And it's analyzing and looking at the harmonic relationships with all those. So as I pull out here, it's impacting stuff that's happening up there. As I boost stuff there, it has some sort of impact down here as well. So you're manipulating the entire harmonic spectrum. Compression is a little bit different than that. But we sing quiet, we sing louder in music in particular, and even speech, I guess, is the really dynamic speaker. I'm taking this out full time, so I'm sucking out 11 dB at 300 right here. Well, man, maybe if the dude's talking or singing quiet, it's a really introspective song and they're talking quieter. I actually want that warm character back in there. I don't want to pull that out, and I don't want to go in and re-EQ it for every song. Oh my gosh, holy cow. So they have tools nowadays, and this is just the world we live in nowadays. There are dynamic tools out there where it actually dynamically adjusts what's going on. Waves makes one called the F6. It's a 6-band parametric EQ, but it's a dynamic EQ, and it. I think I have to have a picture of it in my. Yeah. So you would cut it out, but it's more floating. It's a dynamic relationship to where it's actually doing something, and as you get quieter, you are allowing the signal to stay in there and really not treat the signal. You're treating it dynamically. So, Micah.
Does that work off like, excuse me, a ratio then?
That's more like a threshold, basically. It's across a threshold. Yep. The Digicode desks have this on every channel too. See if I can close that window. Yeah, so here would be like a dynamic EQ right here on like this one. You've got a over/under, whether you got a threshold, you've got an attack and release. And these are all terms we'll talk about in compression. You go, well, isn't this just a compressor? That's where it starts getting confusing. Basically, you're just looking at like, as you cross the threshold, that's when it starts doing things dynamically. So you can set that threshold really high or really low, depending on how much you want that to interact with at what volume.
But that's still on the EQ side of it.
That's still an EQ. Yeah, and this is where it gets pretty crazy. The first thing we have in line on all of our vocals, and we've started using this more, is a multi-band compressor, and you'll actually see.
God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power. God
You can actually watch it working.
Is here to set the captives free.
That's doing a lot of work right there at what is that, 273? Again, where just that boxiness of the voices. And we actually they say, well, that's a compressor. Why are you putting that before EQ? It's a pretty transparent compressor, actually. We're basically saying, I don't want to suck a ton of stuff out. I want to do a little bit of EQ work right here. But I'm going to let this thing just dynamically handle my audio processing first. So F6 just came out a few months ago, which is why we primarily use C6. This is also a way, man, the way we do our snare drums is a case of largely compression. So even as we look at, we'll go back here and just turn on. So we're doing things with compression and basically as what would be an expander in these areas to bring out certain frequencies when they hit the drum and then suck it back down so we're not introducing feedback into the system. So you don't want that rolling away. So it's just quickly doing some things there. Again, it's that dynamic relationship. Music is dynamic. Speech is dynamic. We're getting tools nowadays that are dynamic and where we normally just say, well, okay, I got to roll out this frequency of this frequency. This is the tool we've always had. And it's not wrong to use that. But as musically as like a quieter, I want the music to live dynamically and kind of in that relationship with how I'm processing it. Yeah, Deb.
Are there presets on the C6 for different instruments?
Oh, there's a lot of presets on there. Oh yeah, goodness. Man, there's mastering, vocals, drums. Oh yeah, drums all day. Keys, strings, guitar. So you can really see it's a very versatile thing. Most of the Waves plugins are an emulation of some old analog tool. C6 is something that there's never been an analog tool in the world like it before. So it really is its own thing. But this is as I look at where even Yamaha releases software updates to its desks and what they start to do, you start to see like, okay, you can have a few channels of dynamic EQ or multiband compression, which is what this is. You start getting to a place where it starts allowing that. More and more front of house guys are using dynamic tools to process audio because it's so versatile and dynamic. It doesn't allow you to just cut something out of a sound full time. You're only cutting it out when it needs to be cut out. So even we have these on our mix bus. As we get louder in that room, we actually start to suck out some of the high-end information so that we don't get a lot of volume complaints anymore. Before we did, we get some volume complaints. Now as you started kind of sucking out our air and our highs as we get louder, so it gets fuller and richer and not louder and brighter, we really stopped getting volume complaints. Because you can tolerate these signals a lot better. It's warm. It's muddy, but there's a warmth down there. So you just don't want to make it muddy. You got to find that balance between the two. But it's warm down that area. So as we look at EQ, and this bleeds into the compression side of things, we want that warmth, but not but we don't want it to get brighter and harsher as we get louder. So that makes sense. I'm going to kind of turn a quarter into compression before I leave EQ, but they are a little bit symbiotic. But yeah, Micah.
I was just going to ask about kind of your relationship between the two and how that relates to your workflow when you're going through kind of per channel.
Yeah, man, I've found the last 2 or 3 years, I spend more time in compression. So actually when I get a vocal or a drum or whatever, I get some sort of input source. And I'm kind of doing I'm past line check, making sure I have signal. I'm into mic check now. And I'm listening to it. I'm actually grabbing my compressor before I'm grabbing my EQ. I just find that way. I got my filter in the right place, so I roll it in at 120, 140, wherever it is, depending on what the source is. But then I'm actually listening with my compressor because I find I don't want to do so much EQ. Man, I was even just watching something this week. The guys were some engineers who I respect immensely were mixing together, and one was commenting on the bass guitar in the mix that he'd heard. It's like, man, what does that EQ look like? And the other engineer looked at his mix and he looked at his kind of his chart and he said, I don't even have the EQ on. It was just a case of like, wow, okay, so you're doing some good things with compression, but like, it was just a dude who's like a solid bass player, really good bass, solid bass player. So he's got his craft honed in. So I don't even have to treat that with EQ actually, because he's doing that all with the instrument. Get your source right, and then I'm just going to compress it to get it to fit in the mix a little tighter. And then compression we'd also call like glue, kind of glues everything together, kind of sucks it all in like that. So I spend more of my time probably in compression than I do in EQ nowadays. Not saying EQ is not important, but I find that just musically compression is really what gives the musicality to music nowadays.
So in the live setting, does the compression come first?
No.
It's still the EQs up there first.
Yep.
You just go to the compressor first.
Yep. Yeah. What Tim's asking about is there's a philosophy in a lot of mixing. Where is it? Right there. Trying to figure out if I can find there's a button on our Digico desk that actually there's a button called EQ. It says like EQ to dynamics or dynamics to EQ. I was trying to see if I could see it on here anywhere as the button, but I don't see it. But basically you can choose whether you go like, most of the time we look down a channel strip, the signal comes in here and then it walks down, it comes out the output, the fader's down here. So it kind of is just walking down this. So you would normally go EQ, then dynamics to, there's a couple of insert points here if you want to go out to outboard gear or plugins and stuff. And then you hit all your auxes for all your in-ears or your subs if you're processing that way, your effects, all that's there. So that's kind of how the signal flow through a channel is. You can actually, there's a theory whether you do EQ then dynamics or dynamics then EQ. And visually it won't actually change the artwork, but it will just process them in the different order.
And if you do it all as a waves insert, like if you just didn't use the
Onboard stuff.
you could do it that way, right?
Yeah, you can just move it around.
You could do it that way, but as far as the desk is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
you can't change the order of how it goes.
No, well, in Digico, you've got a button. You just hit the button and it trades it. Mhm, yep, it's right in the middle in the upper right. And I think Yamaha you can change. A lot of the desks you can change the order of whether you process EQ dynamics. It's pretty unusual that you do dynamics before EQ. Just from what I've experienced, most guys go EQ then dynamics. But there is a time, even like on our snare drum actually, again, it's with the ear. Like, I'll process, this is a bad example. What's in our snare chain live is actually a compressor, then the EQ. And I have gone back in 3 or 4 times and said, is that right? And I trade them around. I don't like what happens. I don't like the sound of the drum. I don't think it matches what the drum actually sounds like. So I actually go dynamics, then EQ in that situation. And I've checked myself on that several times and maybe I'm just doing something wrong. No, I just like the character that it does with that in that order. So I think that's the only thing in our chain that goes EQ then dynamics. For a while we did that on the Pastor mic. We did dynamic then EQ. That was a mistake. We didn't know the button was pushed. And once we unpushed it, it actually sounded a lot better. So again, it wasn't wrong. We'd gone weeks like that. And I was like, it feels weird. Oh, there it is. So it's just one of those things that 100 buttons, you're bound to hit something incorrectly at some point. Not on the artwork. No, it doesn't. You wouldn't know. No, yeah. There's a light on, but it's just like one of those like, oh, okay, and the light's always on one of them. So, yeah. So that's EQ. So, subtractive first, boost to cut. That'd be the big takeaway. If you're going to take anything out of that 35-minute rambling on EQ, that would be the boost. That would be the takeaways there. Subtractive first, why? I think you heard that. Boost to cut, kind of spike that up. Don't slam the volume on the channel, because when you slam that, you're adjusting like the relationship of those frequencies now in the room and all that stuff. So you can kind of start over treating something. You turn the volume way up on it. Now, okay, I got it. I turned it down, so now I get that. Well, now I bring it down to where you're actually using that. You could probably use to bring some of that back in, because you maybe took too much out because you had it so loud in the room. So that's where I'm a big fan of solo in place, because it keeps it at the range that I'm mixing in, so I hear the relationship in the room. Turn everything else off, fix it, put it back in. How's it sound? Great, maybe, and play with that relationship a little bit. So, compression. So this is, again, talking about dynamics. So compression, okay. So dynamic compression, I think that's, I talked about an EQ, and that's really where we're going to see a lot of stuff. I think we're going to spend a lot of time there on that, or where we do nowadays in our workflow. A typical compressor will have 4 things. You see attack, release, threshold, and ratio. There are a number of styles of compressors. There are VCA compressors, which is a voltage-controlled amplifier. Usually it's good for like mixed bus kind of things. There are opto or electro-opto compressors, which basically is like a photocell that it's just a peak reduction. Basically, if you saw a waveform coming in, whatever, it's literally just shaving off. It's peak reduction. It's cutting this out and this out. So it's kind of, here's a middle. So as you adjust that width, it's actually it's just trimming this off here, essentially. That would be like electro-optical. There's FET, which is I can't remember, I can't remember, doesn't matter. There's a FET, the most popular one, you've probably seen of that as like an LA 1176. We use that a lot in what we do. It's super fast, really musical too. But there's different types of compressors that were all around like the 60s, 70s. The LA2A, the LA3A, which came out, Telectronics did those back in like, 60s is when they were out. I think the 3A came out in 69. The 1176 came out in 1967. So a lot of this is right around like rock was transitioning, like almost like the Elvis era, kind of into stone. Like you're starting to get into that 60s, 70s eras when a lot of this stuff kind of came about, which is why we look back that way to know. Even as we look at Christianity, like, okay, who are we in Christ? We look back at the method of Jesus. The same thing if we look at audio. Okay, where are we at now? The tools we have, they're influenced by where we came from, right? It's no different. Who you are today, you look back at where did I come from, that influences who I am today. So it's the same thing when we look at audio. Why do we do what we do? What gives us that character, that sound? We look back at the tools that brought us to where we are. So primarily the 4 knobs. Now there's a lot of other knobs on here. Ignore those for now. But threshold essentially is, let me erase some things here. If you look at just like a chart of a signal, so you're going to cross, actually better yet, I'll just bring one up online here because it's probably faster than I can draw it. I think I even have one in here somewhere. Is there one in here? Again, these are great resources that I'll point out later in terms of why these are up on my screen right now. But essentially, the threshold is the point at which the signal crosses. So you set a threshold on your compressor, and this is saying once the signal crosses that, it's not that the compressor kicks in. The compressor's always on if you have it engaged. But that's when it starts treating that signal. And again, it's not a on-off. It ramps in. The attack is how soon after crossing the threshold does my compressor start to expand to full range. So it could be fast attack, it could be mid attack, it could be slow attack. So in the case of like a snare drum has a super high transient. Gah! God, there's a huge impulse. You'll see like on a snare drum, it looks like this is kind of the waveform of snare drum, right? So I have a threshold at some point. The volume crosses that threshold as there's my center line. As we cross, like fast attack would say, okay, I'm going to start treating the compressor. I want the compressor to kick on. As soon as it senses the crossing the threshold, I want it to kick on. What that's going to do is it's going to bring this signal down, so now the waveform, instead of being very dynamic, is very compressed, right? So it's very fast attack. So at snare, you're not going to have a very fast, you're not going to hear a lot of the punch of the drum. Let me just actually, I've got a good example of that right here. DPR 402, this is I think it's a VCA style compressor. Solo the snare drum, and you'll hear. So hearing a lot of that. But what happens if I make it a lot faster? I lost a lot of this. Now it's just this, right? Hear that? So you can kind of figure out like fast. I'm going to slow down the attack. That makes sense? Attack there, you can kind of actually, this is a really fast compressor. It's yeah, so you can actually see like, oh, as I turn the knob, now I can actually hear, which is the way I learned compression. It wasn't until 10 years ago, that, like halfway through my journey into audio, that I was like, I should figure out how to use a compressor sometime. Somebody brought one into someone, was like, hey, can you put this on my in-ears? I was like, yeah, dude, cool. What the crap is this? I won't today, but we can talk about it sometime. Yeah, I did in the last one we did. Yeah. So attack, that's attack. The ratio is literally just, so ratio, you'll see like 1 to 4 or 1 to 1 or 1 to 2 or 2 to 1, I guess. Like a 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. Here it just drops the colon 1. It's just kind of a 4 to 1, 5 to 1. So you'll have, that's for every 4 dB in. If it's a 4 to 1 ratio, for every 4 dB in, it's letting 1 dB out. That makes sense? So if you have a 2 to 1, it's actually a very gentle kind of compression ratio. It's only kind of cutting it in half a little bit there of what crosses that threshold. For higher ratios, like really, you'd use those on like really like snare drum, kick drum, things that have a high transient. Typically is where you use your high ratios. If you want, you don't have to, but you can to get a different character out of the sound. So that's just the ratio of how much sound is allowed through as you engage that compressor. The threshold is when you tell that compressor to basically start doing its work. And the release is just how long after the signal crossing back below the threshold does that compressor then open back up. So you can use those tools to actually shape the sound. Snare is a great example because, again, we heard that get down. So basically, now you hear like a lot of that. You got the transient, which is that, and then you've got kind of the sustain, which is maybe the snares kind of shimmering out or the body of the drum kind of shimmering out. You can cut that off, so it's just stop, stop, or ho, ho, a little more jazzy maybe or something. It's what do you want that drum to sound like? Again, use your ears. What complements the style of the song? Is it a slow introspective song? Is it a fast rock song? You don't want a whole lot of like whoa, whoa, whoa in that song. So you might do a fast attack, fast release. A little slower song, maybe it's a fast attack, slow release, or maybe it's a mid attack, slow release. Different things like that. So most of your compressors, you're going to see that attack, that release, that threshold. You'll have the gain, which basically, so as you are hitting this thing, you can see it's a little lights up here, gain reduction. So it's pulling out 6 to 9 dB. So I'm making this up. I've got about 9 dB of makeup gain, which is saying like, I actually don't want to hear the compressor, I just want to do some work. So I'm boosting the whole thing 9 dB, but it cuts it out at that too. If I didn't have that makeup gain, like, I can really hear it suck that out. So I'm going to add a little bit of makeup gain back in. To kind of do that with that. Every tool is different. There's tons of tools out there. Most of the tools you'll see on your desks will have, like, even if we look at the Digico one, in our world, can I get this to do it? Where is it? There. Okay, great. This is a great graph. Yamaha's got great artwork too. This is actually what taught me how to figure out what I'm hearing and seeing, kind of like what the emulations we saw a few minutes ago. You also have characteristics like knees. This one just says hard, medium, soft. Yamaha says like hard, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think are your options. And that's just this little curve right up here. It's the apex to where that threshold kind of bends over. So if you watch this, it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see there I just went down to medium, soft. So it's how does that signal kind of round that corner, or does it just turn the corner quickly? Again, it's going to have a different sound. Listen to it as you engage that. There's nothing right or wrong. It's the tools are there to be used, I think is the big takeaway there. Again, you can kind of watch on this chart here the fast. So if I adjust my attack, slow that attack, kind of see what's happening there. The release, same thing, fast release, slow release. So there's some great tools out there that allow you to see that on the desks. Yamaha's desk. Here's kind of Yamaha's thing. See that threshold changing again where that relationship is. You can kind of see that top moving. There's that ratio, that 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 25 to 1, or 2.5 to 1. I was like 25, what? 1 to 1 is just a straight line, right? So all on that slope. Yeah, the threshold. So it's just it's the volume. So it's a decibel. So let's go back to, yeah. So let's just go back to this. This is 20 dB. So as we look at a snare, is this a snare? It's really not even doing any compression there. That. So it's just how much is it engaging, how much gain reduction is it engaging, how much is it actually engaging the signal as it goes. There is a ton of, we're going to run out of time again. Man, I can go all day. I couldn't actually. Here's again just different tells of compressors. We'll just kind of listen to Davis's vocal on this. You can kind of hear as I engage and disengage these. 2A, again, doesn't even have a threshold number. it's literally just peak reduction and gain. So that's that makeup gain. Compress is like 3-to-1, limit's like 100-to-1, I think it's 60-to-1, something like that. It's super high. A limiter is a dynamic tool basically saying like a signaling to the threshold and just like it'll make sure that signal doesn't cross the threshold, essentially. So you'll hear terms like brick wall limiting. Broadcast uses a lot of limiters. Limiters aren't super musical. They're not really friendly. You don't really want to use them a lot of things. They're good in mastering. It's like when we master tracks, we'll put a limiter on it just so if we ever get across, get to the ceiling, we might suck out just a little bit so that we're not overdriving or going to clip something, peak something out. There's the LA3A that looks very similar. The difference between the 2A and the 3A, the 2A is a tube style. The 3A is faster because it's actually solid state electronics inside. So it just can engage faster because you're not having to do with tube circuitry. The 1176 is another style compressor. Again, we have an input, we have an output, so you don't actually have a threshold knob. You're creating your threshold essentially by adjusting the input and the output, kind of that relationship of the two. This is a good thing to remember. So fast attack's usually a lower number. On the 1176, fast attack is actually a higher number. So this is just the way it was designed, 1969. The higher number is faster. The higher number is faster in these. So that actually gets a lot of people. And here's a case of like 12 and 20-to-1 ratios are more for limiting. Again, super high ratio. 4 to 8 is more musical. There's also an all button, which gives you a really, really weird signal. A lot of guys like it on like drum overheads, drum bus. You can get some really crazy, gnarly compression out of it. Again, it's what are you doing musically that you want to create. These are just the tools that are there. There's also you'll see a black face LA76. You also might see a silver face LA76. Again, they just have a different character, kind of like that E and that G channel. Those are just different styles of compressors that are out there. The DBX, this is an old DBX 160. Again, a VCA style. They all have different characters and jobs. This one was built in the 70s, really popular in 80s music. The one we listened to before, but it's, again, a very fast compressor. So there's many styles out there. They all have a place. And there are great blogs, man. Sound on Sound is one. Soundonsound.com writes a lot of great things. There's a great article in there on compression. Waves has started doing a lot of really great equipment. There's a ton. If you follow them on YouTube, they even just did a thing last week on like, why would you use analog vintage EQs? And they walk through like the Pultecs and the SSLs and all these things and the knees, built in the 70s, you got the 1073, the 1066, the 1081. What do those do? When would I use that? You know, is this the right instrument to use that on? Is it, oh man, I've been trying to do this with a vocal. They actually designed a tool in 1973 that did that. Oh, that's kind of cool. I wish I would have known that. You know, like you can apply that through the emulation of these plugins, or maybe figure out what the plugin's doing or what that original tool is doing, and you just emulate that with what you have on the desk, the standard vintage or the standard EQ and compression. You kind of do what it's doing. There are a lot of great resources, but they have started doing a lot with vintage compressors, EQs, in just teaching you how to utilize them, which is really helpful. And it teaches a lot about, again, where we came from. You start learning about like, oh, the Neve 1073. Yeah, I've seen that in the studio we recorded our Christmas album in. Why is it, like, what does it do? Like, I can hear it, but like, what am I actually hearing? Kind of breaks that down and talks to the guys who kind of designed it and stuff like that too. Man. Yeah, was this helpful? Probably introduced more questions than you came in with. Yeah, EQ takeaway there again, subtractive first, boost to cut. Dynamics, there's a lot of dynamic stuff, but compression, yeah, man, it's just so much. I think dynamic compression is really where we're seeing in dynamic EQ. Even I was listening to a podcast recently where they're interviewing a guy named Zito. He's the front of house guy for One Republic right now, and they were asking like, what kind of makes a Zito mix? Like, why? Like, if you were to say like, what's kind of your trademark on your mix? He said, man, I'd be hard pressed to say that like, kind of my trademark right now is if a mix doesn't have. Like if you looked at a soundboard and be like, oh, okay, there's really no multi-band compression or dynamic EQ. It's probably not Zito's mix. He's like, that's where I'm finding the meat of what I'm doing with my mix right now, is that the music is dynamic, and so should my mixing. So should, more than just moving faders, so should the way I process things. As it gets quieter, it should sound different than what it does when it's big and impactful. So he's doing that a lot with dynamic tools, which is where, again, these C6 tools and the F6 come in handy. All these dynamic things. Yamaha's got them. The X32's got a dynamic EQ you can put in, the M32 does. The Digico desks have them on every channel. Yeah, that's really starting to see, and even like in the last Digico software update, it went from giving you like 10 to use on the entire desk, like, to every channel now has it. Because they're seeing this is kind of where music is going, is this dynamic relationship between where we are in the music to what's happening and how I process it. And it gets fun, actually. When you start doing that, you start getting some really fun things. Once I start getting into this area, I'm like, oh, I feel like a little kid again, like in terms of like my first time on a desk, like everything's new again. So these are fun tools that we have at our disposal. But I encourage you to look into them. Yeah, what I'll close with real quick here is just listening to vocal and how with the different EQs on it or different compressors on it. They're not going to sound too radically different, but they might. You probably will hear a little bit of character difference here.
God who comes to save, God who comes to save.
That's no compression. How we would normally process this.
But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power. God who comes to save is here to set
watching the needle bounce.
captives free. But who can stop
Let's watch this one.
Almighty?
So it's cutting out a lot more.
Our God is the Lion
I can actually hear this one a lot more.
He's roaring with power. God
Again, that was a tube. So let's look at the same version, but electro-optical.
set the captives
Solid state.
free. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion.
So again, there's kind of, you're hearing the differences there on the 402 on vocal.
God who comes to save is here
little more
to
meat.
set the captives free. But who can stop?
But I don't hear it like I did on the 2A and the 3A. It's closer to the 1176. Really, really fast compression. And this is back to that VCA compressor down here.
God who comes
Whoops.
to save
Turn them off.
is here to set the captives free. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion.
So again, multiple tools out there at your disposal, both in studios, on a desk, and things like that. They each do something different. Nothing's right or wrong. It's what you want to hear. I tend to use more of a transparent one. So on vocals, I'm probably not going to use the 2A, the 3A. I use them on acoustic, but because I don't want to hear the compression of the vocal. I want to know it's working, but I don't want to actually hear the compression on it. So I'm going to choose a different compressor in that case. Yeah. So that's that. Man, stick around if you got questions. I'm way over, so apologize to the. Is it video or lighting next? I don't know which one's next. Okay, video. Zach's probably like tool. So yeah, guys. Yeah, stick around if you got questions or come back in. Because everybody's sitting in here probably. It's all right. Yeah, guys, I hope it was helpful. Please, if you got questions, ask, email, text, whatever. Stick around for a few minutes afterwards or whatever, and we can get some things. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. Please keep coming. Tell your friends.